Will, let's go through this piece. 6 ways that Jack Smith's Trump indictment is politically shady. Let's go through all 6, and I have questions about all of them, so we'll proceed. Will, walk us through the piece.
Sure. So first of all, Charlie, as always, thanks for having me on. This new indictment against President Trump in Washington, D.C. Is based on flawed legal premises. As numerous other commentators have already said, the timing of it is deeply politically suspect. My point, though, is that when you actually look at the indictment, when you look at the charges, when you look at the facts that Jack Smith is apparently relying on to press this indictment, this is a case that's built on a foundation of sand. This is a case that, as we've seen with Jack Smith time and time again, he's relying on wildly overbroad interpretations of federal statutes to attempt to shoehorn political speech and other non-culpable conduct into a criminal prosecution. That's wrong. That's contrary to our traditions of the rule of law, fair and unbiased prosecution in this country. And that's really what got me speaking out against what's going on here.
Yeah, so let's start with the first one, which, again, I'm a layman, but I also wasn't born yesterday. I've seen a fair amount of federal indictments, and I read a lot more than I used to, Will, because a lot of people in the conservative orbit keep on getting indicted. So you just, by result of my profession, you just keep on reading indictments. The first one in your article, The Federalist, it's a terrific piece I want to point people to, is this idea of almost thought crimes. And, you know, we have a show we do on Rumble where we joke around that thought crimes are coming next, that you're not even allowed to think the wrong thing. But so much of this indictment is centered on Trump's alleged state of mind, that somehow what he was thinking, that now what happens in your brain is somehow you're able to then put people in jail for having the wrong thoughts. Is that an unfair categorization, Will Scharf?
No, I think it's pretty close to the reality, Charlie, and we're truly living in scary times. I'll put it as simply as I can. If President Trump thought that the election had been illegally stolen, if he thought that the allegations he was making about the election were true, I believe that's an absolute defense, or close to an absolute defense, against all 4 charges that have been brought here. So what we have here is Jack Smith, and it's paragraph 2 of the indictment. His view is that the election wasn't stolen. He's attempting to prosecute President Trump for believing the opposite. Now, that's not grounds for a criminal prosecution. You can't just say that because you disagree with the guy that he should go to prison. That's not the way things work in America. But if you look at the indictment, if you look at what they're required to prove in the indictment, it's clear to me, it's clear to other legal commentators who have weighed in, if President Trump was under the belief that this election had been stolen and the actions he was taking were necessary, required, proper, and legally valid, then there is no case here.
Yeah, and it's protected speech, and also you're allowed to petition your government, right? Not only that, it's explicitly put in the First Amendment. It's not an abstraction. You're allowed to question state legislatures, question election results. We have a 12-minute, we're not going to play it, obviously. We have a 12-minute clip that we put on social media of Democrats questioning election results. And honestly, you should be allowed to question election results. Nothing should be off limits. And I hate to put it this way, but this is almost religious, theocratic type behavior by the regime, where the election is almost like the state-run religion, where you can't think something. Am I off base by even getting there, Will? I think we're onto something.
No, Charlie, you're not wrong at all. And it's not just Democrats in recent years. I mean, every election this century that's been won by Republicans, Democrats have attempted to challenge electors. Democrats have attempted to challenge the electoral vote. I mean, that's historical record. But I mean, challenging the results of elections goes back to really the founding era. You go to the 1824 election where Andrew Jackson believed with at least some validity that he'd been robbed by a corrupt bargain between Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams.
Yes.
Rutherford B. Hayes in the Reconstruction era, they called him Rutherfraud for years because of alleged irregularities in the electoral count that year. I mean, this is something that's gone on time and time again in American history, and Jack Smith is trying to turn what's really, as you said, thought crime, President Trump disagreeing with the way that election had been conducted, into a criminal conspiracy. And that's just not how the law works.
And you're allowed to push back against your government. You're allowed to believe silly things. And just think of other thought crimes that we've lived through, Will, because this is nothing new. It was a thought crime to say that the virus came from a laboratory, not from some Himalayan bat. It was a thought crime, literally, where I got banned on social media to say that the Hunter Biden laptop was legitimate. We had to believe for an election season that it was Russian disinformation. So the regime has been conditioning us through wrongthink, criminal prosecution, wrongthink, social media censorship. And I lived through it on a far less consequential landscape on the college campus stuff, Will. When I go to college campuses, which is something I know that you care a lot about, free speech warrior, and why you're running for Missouri Attorney General, these campuses, if you disagree with the orthodoxy of the high priest of the university, you shouldn't be allowed to come on college campus. So this entire regime is built around smaller, different patterns, and now this is the big one. If they're successful, Will Scharf, what will this mean for the future of the First Amendment? What sort of precedent would this set?
Yeah, the left wingers who run the deep state, run Washington D.C. and their allies in the mainstream media want us all to sit down and shut up. That's as simple as it is. They think they own this country. They think they own our government. They think they own every aspect of our lives, and any dissent will not be tolerated. Now, just coming back to the legal point here, if President Trump believed the theories that he and his team were pushing out there, if he believed that they were meritorious, if he believed that there had been fraud along the lines of what he suggested, and there is evidence that there was a ton of fraud that was not investigated, that was that was not fully brought to light. If he believed those things, I believe that's an absolute defense to certainly some of, if not all, four charges brought in this most recent indictment. I mean, they are alleging a criminal conspiracy. Criminal conspiracies, I talk about this in my article, under some of the charges that have been brought, they need to prove specific intent. They need to prove that President Trump's intent was depriving voters of their right to vote. Now, if President Trump's intent was validating what he believed was accurate theories of election fraud, then that's an absolute defense, and he cannot be convicted under the charges that form this indictment. Now, that's just an outrageous thing to have happen here. They're attempting to criminalize political dissent. They're attempting to criminalize election challenges in advance of the 2024 election. We're at the very cutting edge here of a very dangerous movement, a very dangerous moment in American history.
Yeah, and I want to also emphasize, the prosecution is going to have to, their whole case, again, there is not a witness that I could imagine would be telling the truth, or that Donald Trump would be like, I really know there was no fraud. Having spent private time extensively with President Trump, he 100% believes that there is fraud in the 2020 election. To this day, it's not some sort of shtick, it's not some sort of theatrical play. He believes at his core that the election was stolen from him. Now, they're saying, you're wrong, you're not allowed to believe that. Guess what? That's not criminal. That's the point. They have to have some witness say, Trump thought it was a lie and he was only doing it to raise money or stay in power. There is zero evidence that I could testify to that extent, Will Scharf. Spending private time with him, he 100% believes this election was stolen from him. That's a pretty good defense.
And it's not just President Trump. 3 of the 4 counts are conspiracy charges. So they need to prove that the people that President Trump was allegedly conspiring with also believed that the theories they were pushing were false. Whether that's John Eastman or Sidney Powell or any of the other folks implicated by this indictment, the proof that they need to offer here is so extravagant, is so extreme. This indictment should have never been brought. And the fact that they're trying to ram it through in a D.C. courtroom in front of, basically a hand-picked liberal judge, in front of presumably a hand-picked far-left jury, tells you everything you need to know about this case. They are terrified of the idea that this case could end up in West Virginia or in a court where President Trump could get a fair shake. I got to interrupt. We only have a minute, and then we have you again, Will Scharf, after the break. Who would decide a venue change? What's the precedent for that? Would it be the judge itself? What are the technical details there? So it's a heavy lift because a lot of the actions that they're talking about occurred in Washington, D.C., and a lot of the witnesses are going to be in Washington, D.C. That'll be a motion that will be filed in the district court here. But ultimately, this case is going to end up on appeal, probably, certainly in front of the D.C. Circuit, probably in front of the Supreme Court. And if the judge just decides to steamroll over legitimate legal challenges, both to the case itself and to the way that it's conducted, she's going to have to answer to higher courts there. And that's where I think this case is going.